Tonight we're going to focus on the being together part of it, because when COVID-19 appeared, it seemed like the world changed kind of overnight in ways that really shook the norms of how we come together, how we are together. We transitioned off the streets, we left the shops, we came home from work and church and the town plazas. When we do go out, we don't shake hands or give hugs. We keep our distance. We're concealed behind masks. And there can be a kind of like anxiety about social proximity. I know I've been listening to classical music when I go to the grocery store. Anybody else feel a little bit of that inclination for classical music at the grocery store? And meanwhile, the ways that we do communicate with each other are really evolving quickly. We see each other through this like pixelated format. I was just laughing that I have to turn off my self view screen on a Zoom call, because otherwise it's like I'm distracted by my own image. You know, I have to look past my own image to see you all. And, you know, we're talking on the phone instead of meeting at coffee shops. And some of us are discovering in this time more nourishment in our home lives. Some of us are turning inwards and can feel the privilege of that, listening with more attunement and spaciousness, and discovering or rediscovering things about ourselves. And also, many of us are experiencing feelings of fear and loss and uncertainty and despair and loneliness. So if we want to understand the power of Sangha, we have to begin at the ground floor, which is loneliness. Even before the pandemic, right, we had this epidemic escalation of loneliness in our culture. And just to share, I wanted to share just a few quick statistics with you to put this into context, right? 61% of American adults recently reported feeling isolated. 37 of American adults self-identified as chronically lonely. This is before the pandemic, okay? This is not in the last 8 weeks, this is before. One study of chronic loneliness revealed that 1 in 4 adults reported that they, quote, right, hadn't spoken to another person about something that was really meaningful to them in the past 6 months.
Whoa.
Loneliness is really like, it's a public health crisis as well. There's like an equivalent, a research equivalent of loneliness, chronic loneliness, being as lethal as 15 cigarettes a day. And that's because of its effects on our immune system, inflammation, sleep rhythms, self-regulation, and of course, our mental health. And I'm reminded of, there's a famous story about Swami Satchitananda. Some of you are probably familiar with this. Someone asked him, like, how can I truly achieve health? And he went over to the board, the blackboard, and he wrote 2 words. He wrote the word illness, and then next to it, he wrote the word wellness. And in the illness, he circled the I, and in the wellness, he circled the we, right? And it's important to note in that the feeling of loneliness is not necessarily a factor of being alone, right? Psychic disconnection is not the same as physical solitude. We all know what it's like to be at a party and feel alone, right? Anybody never had that experience? I don't know anyone who hasn't. And we also know what it's like to just be with one other person and feel seen. We can also experience that sense of feeling seen, which is, it's one of the niyamas, the kind of cultivation of care for the self that Patanjali speaks about in the 8-limb path of yoga. We can experience that sense of santosha, which translates to mean contentment, And that word sam, which is the same word you see in like Sangha or Sanskrit or Samavriti or Sankalpa or Samana, that sam sound in Sanskrit has to do with bringing together or coming together. And so santosha is when we are coming together in contentment. And we can experience santosha when we are alone. Loneliness can be self-compounding. So when we feel lonely, we can feel ashamed of our lonely self. And the story that we tell ourselves is that something's wrong with us. There's that acronym, that terrible acronym, FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. We had a little like self-confessional here. We had a Zoom call a couple days ago with my high school class. And it brought me back to this memory of how I would wait to get an invitation before going to a party, you know. But when you're like a senior in high school and it's a Saturday night and it's just like everybody's going to so-and-so's house, you're not necessarily going to get like a personal invitation. So then it would be like Monday at the lunch table or something, and somebody would be like, why didn't you come out to the party, you know, on Saturday night? Where were you? And I was, you know, home waiting for the invitation. So I can feel, it's that sense of, you know, we can feel like we have to protect the more vulnerable parts of ourselves. So I just want to pause with this much together, because it's like we can talk on a statistical level, we can talk on a theoretical level, but what matters is when we inquire inwardly, you know, what does the heart say? So I'd like to just invite you to hear, if you haven't already, even to close your eyes. I naturally find myself always like the hands move towards the heart to listen. And perhaps it's just this simple question of, you know, when you ask of yourself, what's there? How in this moment do you feel? How can you touch that tender heart and allow, if there is a recognition of anything that I've shared with you thus far about loneliness, you know, how do you hold it? So, you know, and you can feel it for yourself, how with recognition also comes acceptance and care. Just by recognizing, something else becomes present, the being with becomes present, and also an invitation. So I want to just ask this question of, what is loneliness? And as I've been kind of reflecting on this, is moving towards this moment together, I feel that the loneliness is really the core feeling of the separate self, right? When we're in this separate self, the core feeling is one of loneliness. And it's also a biologically rooted state that motivates us, that is the impetus to connect. Right? We're wired to be social creatures, right? The brain's efficiency, the actual organ of the brain, the energetic efficiency of the brain depends on our interpersonal neurobiology. Our brains function most effectively in pro-social environments, right? And our nervous systems are hardwired to regulate through safe and secure connections with others. It's a phenomenon that we can see in other species. Like, if you could imagine that if you are, you know, the gazelle and you're alone, you better be paying attention all the time, right? And if you're in a herd, there can be a little bit of a kind of lightening of the stress load, right? The distribution of that vigilance can move through the herd. And we are in the same way our nervous systems, our brains are built. I was this yesterday, I went up into the mountains and I think probably, I mean, this is kind of like a mantle, but I was probably the first person up there. It was like 5:30 in the morning. And when I stepped into the woods by myself, I was aware, my nervous system was aware of, I don't think there are any other human beings in there. And there was a little bit of a sense of like, I better pay attention. I better be listening to my surroundings in a way that if I was getting out of the car at noon with a friend and just tromping into the forest, I likely wouldn't have been as attuned to. There is a theory in the field of psychology called social baseline theory, and it was based on an experiment where a researcher named James Cohen, Dr. James Cohen, he took volunteers and he hooked them up to an MRI, and he put little electrodes on their feet, on their toes, and sent little shocks to them, and then observed, based on whose company they were in, what the actual experience of pain in their brain was, and found that people who are alone physiologically experience the most pain. People who were in the company of a stranger experienced less pain. And people who were with a loved one experienced the maximum comfort possible under the circumstances. When we intentionally come together around a challenge, we can activate the prefrontal cortex. So that's the part of the brain that's responsible for compassion and kindness and rational thinking and generosity. It's the more, mature, mindful part of the brain. And we can move ourselves out of a limbic fear response. And it's why in this moment where we're all dealing with really, I mean, permeating kind of anxiety, global anxiety, right? And difficult feelings and we're at home. It's kind of a setup, right? I don't know anyone in my personal, life, in my relations, who hasn't had some moment of needing support to regulate. So Patanjali places, we could call it like relational hygiene, as the very first limb of the path of yoga. The yamas are kind of ways of cultivating social integrity, and they are ahimsa, nonviolence, satya, which is truthfulness, asteya, which is non-stealing, brahmacharya, which is about our sort of energetic conservation, and aparigraha, which is non-attachment. And in doing that, so he says the first step of the yogic path is cultivating right relationship. In doing that, he recognizes that the movement out of the sense of the separate self and into relationship is fundamental to our spiritual evolution. We cannot awaken without sensing our belonging to the whole. And loneliness is helpful in that sense, because loneliness illuminates our longing for belonging. As the meditation Tara Brach's teacher, Tara Brach, says, she just put out a wonderful podcast recently about this, and she titled it "Loneliness as the Sacred Portal into Presence." Sacred portal. So I want to talk a little bit about the practice of Sangha and the Buddha's teachings on the three jewels, the Triratna, which are recognized as the true refuges, the places where we can truly find a sense of homecoming. They reflect this understanding, and they really are tangible and practical ways that we can help to center ourselves in the midst of uncertainty. So the first of the Triratna is the Buddha, which is the, you know, in you could say like in the lineage of the Buddha, it is the Buddha, right? But really in that kind of archetypal sense, um, the first of the Triratna is consciousness itself. It is the wisdom teacher. It's the intuition in our heart. It is the Buddha nature. The second is the dharma. And the dharma is, you know, it's the teachings specific to any tradition, but it's also just the way that we receive wisdom teachings in our lives and how we apply them. So it could be like the good advice that your grandma gave you, right? The real good advice, the real orientation. And then the third of the Triratna is the Sangha. And traditionally, Sangha referred to spiritual communities in two ways. There's the more kind of conventional level, which is it's called the samvritti, which is like, it refers to the actual assembly of practitioners, right? And that co-regulation of the nervous systems and that sharing of a specific and holding of a specific body of teachings in a lineage. And in a way, we could say this coming together, this format of coming together and just being together, circling up and listening to each other and examining this subject matter is on that level of samvritti sangha. And within the samvritti sangha, there's this beautiful magical word, kalyana mitra. Right? Kalyana mitra is a friend who accompanies and supports our growth. I can see some of you have gone through yoga teacher training with me, and you definitely know this word, dear mitras. And mitra is not like a friend who's gonna affirm, you know, your worst inclinations or tell you you're right when you're wrong. Right? The friend that is a kalyana mitra is, as Rumi says, you know, when our friendship is made of being awake, it's a friendship where the bond is a bond of wakefulness. I like to think of kalyana mitras as like the finger that points to the moon, the person who's pointing. That's a true friend. And there's that saying, seek not what the wise ones know, seek what they sought, right? So I feel like that that in my life, you know, when I'm needing to call on the force of kalyana mitra, of true friendship, when I'm needing to dig myself out of a hole, yeah, what I filter relationships through is this concept of kalyana mitra. I look into like, what is this person seeking earnestly in their life? And reciprocally, like, what am I supporting for this person in their life? So when we consider like this level of sangha, we can say in some ways that there's been this interesting alchemical thing going on with the movement onto Zoom and away from hugs and away from, you know, the yoga studio where we can all sweat and breathe together, right? So how can we resonate with Sangha when we're not able to be in the physical field together? And this is where the second layer of Sangha comes in. The second layer of Sangha is we say like the Arya Sangha, which is the noble or ideal level of Sangha. And it refers to that non-physical, or we should say like beyond physical, but also within physical field of all of our spiritual friendships. It's the recognition of our interdependence. And when we take refuge in this innermost sense of Sangha, we acknowledge the inseparable connections of all of our lives. You know, in a straightforward way, you know, we are presented with the fact of our interdependence by this virus circulating around the world. We're also faced with the fact, or invited to the fact, of our interdependence in how we link our thoughts and our efforts and our kind attention to this moment and to each other. So this practice of Sangha is about seeking the ultimate spiritual friendship, which is friendship with the whole of creation. And Arya's Sangha is reflected in wisdom traditions around the world, and I wanted to share with you just a few of my favorite kind of quotes from different angles. The poet John Donne, who said, "No man is an island." Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, in a single garment of destiny." Rumi said, "There's a community of spirit. Join it and feel the delight of walking down the street, in the noisy street, and being the noise." And the late poet Mary Oliver spoke about it when she said, "I never met any of my friends, of course, in the normal way. They were strangers, and they lived only in their writings." She wrote that in an essay about her loneliness in childhood. She said, "Whitman was the brother I did not have." And there's the Lakota phrase, "Ona takuyasin," right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. It means all my relations, as Wendelin said at the beginning of our time together, all calling in all of our relations. It's spoken during prayer, and it's invoked in ceremony to invite and to acknowledge all relatives to the moment, including all species, forms of life, past and present. So I wanted to share with you this. This is from Black Elk. He was a prophetic Sioux elder, and he had a dream. It's a Sangha dream, right? Sangha by any language. And he shared it. "When I was standing on the highest mountain of them all, round about me, beneath me, was the whole hoop of the world. And while I stood there, I saw more than I can tell, and I understood more than I saw. For I was seeing in a sacred manner the shapes of all things in the spirit, and the shape of all shapes as they must live together like one being. And I say that the sacred hoop of my people was one of the many hoops that made one circle, wide as daylight and as starlight. And in the center grew one mighty flowering tree to shelter all of the children of one mother and one father. And I saw that it was holy." I asked one of my dearest mitras to read us a poem. David, are you there?
Yeah, what a privilege to be asked, and thank you, Shawn. This is one of my poems, and Shawn had asked me to read something about this being together that you're describing so beautifully, Shawn. It's a poem called "Hymn," and it's a little bit of a riff on my hymn singing experience as a child, where everybody in church would know the first verse of the hymn and sing it loudly, and then only a few people would know the second verse of the hymn, and then almost nobody would know the third verse of the hymn and would just hum along. And I think that our togetherness in the world is a little bit like that too, where there's a part of me that everybody knows and can recognize when they see me on the street. And then there's a part of me that only my intimates know. And then there's a part of me that even I don't know. That's also a reality. So this is called "Hymn." Where somewhere in the story, a certain hymn begins. It's the night the lights have failed. My mother reclines on the couch, the candles all around her. My father hunches over the fuse box. Where somewhere in the story, the hymn goes on. It's the story in which each of us is making up a story. And we search for each other. We hold the candles out, but only light our own faces. We're somewhere in a story the hymn repeats. It's the last verse no one ever seems to know. It's the one we mouth the words to, watching other mouths mouth words in the dark church of memory.
Thank you. Satsang, it also means to sit in that silent stillness with ourselves. The end of the third verse, right? It means to sit with the inner quality of sattva, which is a word in Sanskrit that means purity, balance. It's one of the triple gunas of Prakriti, the qualities of nature. The other two being rajas and tamas. And the quality of sattva, it manifests as a kind of knowledge and peacefulness and contemplativeness and thoughtfulness and a sense of having nothing to prove. When we are sattvic, when we are within sattva, we are Kalyana Mitra to everyone and everything that we encounter, including all of those inner parts of ourselves. And when we call on the essence of sattva within ourselves, we're calling on those invisible forces from which we can be gifted spiritual nourishment and guidance. And so this is a quote from Sally Kempton, beautiful tantric meditation teacher. She says, loneliness, like fear, is a threshold emotion. You have to pass through it if you want to enter the inner world. In fact, loneliness is the shadow side of solitude, that magical and transformative state that poets and mystics and yogis celebrate as the great laboratory for self-awareness and spiritual growth. If loneliness reeks of alienation and sadness, solitude offers the ground for you to connect to what is truly essential in yourself. Solitude teaches you how to be with yourself. And without it, you never learn to truly be at home with what you are. Alone and the soul emerges, wrote Walt Whitman. So our work, our practice, is to remember our belonging. In any moment when we feel the ache of separation, that core feeling of the separate self, we have the choice to engage in like vibrational activism. We start with the tiniest, closest in place, vibrate something positive. We can activate that neurobiological pathway of belonging, that spiritual pathway of belonging by making a phone call, by writing a note, by thinking a good thought and transmitting that thought, by saying a prayer, doing a metta meditation, standing on your front stoop and banging a pot in gratitude, right? Making a donation and then concentrating on where that donation will go. Having a Zoom dance party. My stepmother is dropping off cupcakes, like hundreds of cupcakes every week to first responders. Crying in company instead of alone. And also by walking alone among the trees, by quieting ourselves and listening inwardly, really listening, befriending, accepting the presence of all of our parts, even the most tender parts of ourselves, the parts that fear that we don't belong. This is the living power of Sangha. So I'd like to invite you again just to come into your breath and your heart field. Who can say where the heart field ends? Just follow it. And there's a beautiful and ancient mantra, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. And it's a blessing. May all beings be well in all realms. Sukhino, to be centered in happiness and joy, to be free from suffering. Bhav is this divine mood of union. And you don't have to reach all the way, wrap yourself all the way around the world and hold all of the loneliness in the world. You can start in that first pulse of your own heart, close in. And then perhaps just the sense, the invisible nadi lines, the invisible connections, threads among us here who just for this moment in time have gathered into this circle of contemplation. And then perhaps from that place, like sending a letter in a bottle out to sea, a prayer for all beings. So I want to just say namaste to all of you, and we were hoping to hear more of your voices, or to receive any questions or answers. We equally appreciate answers. So yeah, so just on a practical note, that you're welcome to put a question in the chat box, or kind of raise a hand, and we'll try to see what happens. Okay. And if you have something to say, but you don't know how to, raising a hand is kind of a technological achievement here. So you're welcome to just unmute yourself and let us know that you'd like to share or ask. It's nice to just look at all of you. It's nice to see and be seen, Sometimes that's what we need.
This is Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I'm a little overwhelmed with all that you have said. I am trying to absorb it, and I think that may be what's happening to a number of us. It's hard to take in, and yet I know it's like to be at the other end and wondering how it's being received. So I just want to offer that much and ask if any of what you have is written, for example, some of those quotes and some of the gems that you mentioned. I was writing as fast as I could and was leaving off the last several words of each statement. So I have lots of thoughts to go back to. And I don't know how to spell conscience, whatever, mitru. Yeah, the friendship and all of that. So is there a way to access some of that?
I'm putting in the chat notes right now, David Keplinger, him.
Uh-huh. Thank you.
And I'm holding up for you, Black Elk
Oh,
Speaks.
yeah, thank you.
And the quote by Sally Kempton came from an article that she wrote for Yoga Journal about meditating on loneliness.
That was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Sally Kempton.
Kempton.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Michaela, may I share your question? Let's just come in. Where are you? It's like, where's Waldo?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's see. Michaela, I just want to make sure that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
She wrote, would you prefer to read it?
Sure. So I'll just read what I wrote in the chat box, but said, I really appreciate your discussion on loneliness versus solitude. I've been feeling very nourished by this time of being at home and quiet, but also feeling like I don't have a lot of social capital to give out to others. So I'm just wondering from you, Shawn, or maybe from others who are here with us, how are you finding the balance of kind of embracing and feeling that nourishment from solitude while also continuing to connect, if not for yourself, but for the sake of your friends and family who may be wanting that pull a bit more?
Mm. This is really, I think, like at the heart of what we're all practicing right now, right? How do we be, you know, and there's and I want to acknowledge the spectrum, the diversity of experiences that we're all having, right? That there are common threads, but then there are like kind of different traumas, different stages of life that we're in, and how we're working with those, stages, those configurations of our home lives and our work lives and our social lives and our spiritual lives. And I'll say this much, that I've always known that I'm an introvert, but I feel that this time has really illuminated that more for me. Just this sense of, I love, being with people, and also I long for solitude, and the solitude is nourishment for me. And so I just want to, Michaela, I really just want to like kind of affirm that, that feeling that you're having of, you know, the balance of kind of, we say like samana vyana, like that inward movement and the nourishment of being at home, and for some of us being at home and being quiet, and then that also that kind of like outward draw of, social, like wanting to serve our relationships well. This is such a practice, isn't it? And I think it's a practice we're all in. And I'll say, just as like a little like glimpse in my life, that I'm waking up early and I'm having time to myself first thing in the day, and that somehow sets the tone for me for the rest of the day. And there are days when I'm going to sleep at the end of the night, like just, you know, um, uh, feeling like, oh, I failed at the kind of energetic balance today. And there are other days when I'm going to sleep at night feeling like that felt good, you know. So it's practice. It's not perfect. We're working on it. I'm seeing a few other questions. I want to come to some of them if we can. I mean, first, I just want to share a couple of the words that we're receiving here, right? And it's worth that you can scroll through these messages that are coming through. On a practical note about Rhonda, your question about is there a way to access the talk? I don't know. Wendelin might be able to help us with that one.
We're recording it, and I started it a little. I got almost everything that Shawn shared.
Thank you.
So I don't know if there's any considerations around like needing everyone to say that's okay to share that with people who would like a recording. I'm not sure, so I didn't think to look into that in advance. So we can do that, and
Don't waste it.
yeah, like figure out some way to post it or give people access to it. I hope so. Yeah.
So stay tuned. If we're able to, we'll find a way to share it with you. And if there were any parts in particular that would be helpful to clarify, I'd be happy to. And Sheena, do you have a question?
This is a personal observation. I don't know if anyone shares this, but I feel that really, really for the first time since maybe a retreat that I took with you and Wendelin last summer, that I've been forced to drop into the sensory body. And I think we're all reaching a point where no amount of news or perhaps substances or long walks or whatever it is that we use to distract ourselves work anymore. And so I'm wondering, for some of us who may be like really deeply feeling in ways that we have often distracted ourselves in the past, how do you navigate a lot of emotions?
Yeah. I think, you know, what you're speaking to, and also what Michaela's, you know, question points to, for me, is allowance. It's like allowing ourselves. And one of the things that, you know, this time where we're not gridded into our days in quite the same way that we were before. And that's not to say that we're all on retreat either, right? There's been movement, like tectonic movement, deep, you know, movement. And it's like when the furniture gets rearranged, the light can like land in the room in a different way. And I think the experience of just being in this moment and really paying attention to what that inner self is, what's emerging, what's revealing itself, what's asking to be acknowledged, integrated, changed, you know. I mean, there's this, like, you know, the kind of joke of the pandemic is that, like, some people will be having kids, some people will be getting divorced, some people will be changing their careers. Like there's this kind of before and after feeling to it. And I feel just in this regard of really listening to ourselves and allowing, and then, you know, breathing and being with all of the resources, the tools of practice that we have through this time. There's a wisdom that's expressing, and allowing, that is our great invitation.
Why is that so hard?
Yeah.
I wanted to interject a little something that has just been helping me, which is to the Rumi quote comes to mind of this being human as a guest house. And somebody said to me recently around, really difficult emotions, and also like I was just irritated by everything, like in my garden for a couple of days and just tripping over things, and this high level of like irritation would come up, and it was unusual level, and to see even the irritation as sacred, as what's underneath that, and what's like David's poem about what's this deeper part of myself that that's uncomfortable and unusual and emerging from some unseen place, and that's a sacred, it's revealing a sacred path forward in some way. Even the most trivial and petty emotions, maybe even most particularly those.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for your presence. And sometimes it's like it's just to know that the questions that we're asking, we're not alone in asking, and the ways that we're seeking to make sense of our own experiences, we're not alone. And the spectrum of like the ups and downs and the failures and successes, and all those waves that we can find ourselves riding, we're not alone. So I really want to thank you for your words and your presence, and your when we examine together, we hold these questions together.
Good enough.
Good enough. And so we want to be respectful of your time, that some of you are past your bedtimes, and we'll be back next week. We hope that you'll join us again next week, so we can explore the other wing of satsang. Right? There's the two wings, the sat and the sang, and